Officer Sarah Chen adjusted her utility belt as she walked through the marble corridors of the Jefferson County Courthouse, her faithful German Shepherd Rex padding silently beside her. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floors. Sarah had been working with Rex for 3 years now, and their partnership had become something special. Rex wasn't just a police dog. He was her partner, her eyes and ears, and sometimes her best friend during the long shifts. The courthouse was buzzing with its usual morning activity. Lawyers in expensive suits hurried past with briefcases. Court clerks shuffled papers, and citizens waited nervously on wooden benches for their cases to be called. Sarah and Rex were conducting their routine security sweep, something they did every morning before the courts opened for business. It was a precautionary measure that had become standard procedure after several security incidents in courthouses across the state. Rex was a drug detection specialist, trained to identify everything from marijuana to cocaine, heroin, and synthetic drugs. His nose was so sensitive that he could detect traces of substances that had been in an area days earlier. Sarah often marveled at his abilities. While humans relied on their eyes, Rex experienced the world through scent, picking up stories and secrets that most people would never know existed. As they made their way through the building, Sarah noticed Rex seemed more alert than usual. His ears were perked up and his tail was held high, signs that he was picking up on something interesting. They had started in the lobby, moved through the administrative offices, and were now approaching the main courtrooms where the day's proceedings would soon begin. Judge Margaret Holloway's courtroom was their next stop. Judge Holloway had been on the bench for 15 years and was known for her fair but strict approach to justice. She handled some of the county's most serious cases, including drug trafficking, organized crime, and white-collar crime. Her courtroom was always immaculate, maintained by a dedicated cleaning staff that took pride in keeping everything spotless. Sarah pushed open the heavy wooden doors, and she and Rex entered the empty courtroom. The American flag stood proudly in one corner, while the state flag occupied the other. Rows of wooden benches for spectators faced the front of the room, where the judge's bench sat elevated like a throne of justice. The witness stand was positioned to the right, and the jury box to the left. Everything was exactly as it should be. Rex began his systematic search, moving methodically through the rows of spectator seating. His nose worked constantly, processing thousands of scent particles with each breath. Sarah watched him carefully, reading his body language like a book she had studied for years. She could tell when he was just conducting a routine search versus when something had caught his attention. As they moved toward the front of the courtroom, Rex's behavior began to change subtly. His pace slowed and his head tilted slightly, a sign that he was concentrating on a particular scent. Sarah felt her pulse quicken slightly. After 3 years of working together, she had learned to trust Rex's instincts completely. He had never given her a false positive, and his alerts had led to some significant discoveries over the years. The morning light filtering through the courtroom windows created an almost reverent atmosphere. Dust particles danced in the sunbeams, and the smell of wood polish and old leather filled the air. This was a place where justice was supposed to prevail, where truth was meant to come to light. Sarah had always felt a sense of respect when entering courtrooms, knowing that important decisions were made here that affected people's lives forever. Rex approached the area near the judge's bench, and Sarah noticed his movements becoming more deliberate. His nose was working overtime now, and she could see the concentration in his dark brown eyes. The judge's bench was an imposing piece of furniture, made of rich mahogany and elevated several feet above the courtroom floor. It had been handcrafted by local artisans when the courthouse was built 30 years ago, and was considered a masterpiece of woodworking. Sarah checked her watch. Court would be starting in about an hour, and she wanted to complete their sweep without interfering with the day's proceedings. Judge Holloway was known for starting promptly at 9 o'clock, and the last thing Sarah wanted was to delay justice because of a routine security check. But Rex was becoming increasingly interested in something near the judge's bench. He circled the area twice, his nose never leaving the ground. Sarah had seen this behavior before. It meant he was narrowing down the source of whatever scent had captured his attention. She felt a familiar mix of excitement and nervousness that came whenever Rex indicated he had found something significant. The courtroom was completely silent except for the soft padding of Rex's paws on the carpet and the distant sounds of activity. Elsewhere in the courthouse, Sarah found herself holding her breath, waiting to see what Rex would do next. In all their time working together, she had learned that patience was crucial. Rushing Rex or trying to force him to alert would only interfere with his natural abilities. Rex sat down directly in front of the judge's bench and looked up at Sarah with an expression that clearly said, "I found something important." His tail wagged once, a controlled movement that indicated his certainty. Sarah felt her heart rate increase as she approached her partner, knowing that whatever he had detected was about to change their routine morning in ways she couldn't yet imagine. Sarah knelt down beside Rex and gently stroked his head, acknowledging his alert. "Good boy, Rex, show me what you found," she whispered. Rex immediately stood and began circling the base of the judge's bench, his nose pressed close to the ornate wooden panels that decorated the front of the elevated platform. His behavior was unmistakable. He had definitely detected the presence of drugs or drug residue in this area. Sarah pulled out her flashlight and began examining the area where Rex was most interested. The judge's bench was built into the wall, with decorative wooden panels covering the space underneath. The craftsmanship was beautiful, with intricate carvings and moldings that spoke to the skill of the original builders. But as Sarah looked more closely, something seemed off about one of the panels near the left side. While the other panels fit flush against the frame, this particular panel appeared to have a slight gap around the edges. It was barely noticeable. Someone would have to be looking for it to spot the difference. Sarah ran her fingers along the edges of the panel and realized that it wasn't secured as tightly as the others. When she pressed against it gently, it moved slightly, as if it were designed to be removable. Rex continued to show intense interest in this exact spot, occasionally pawing at the ground and whining softly. His behavior was becoming more insistent, which told Sarah that whatever was behind that panel was significant. She had seen Rex detect everything from small amounts of marijuana to large quantities of cocaine, and his current level of excitement suggested something substantial. Sarah stood up and looked around the empty courtroom, considering her next move. She was authorized to conduct security sweeps, but physically altering courthouse property, even temporarily removing a panel, was beyond her normal authority. However, Rex's alert gave her probable cause to investigate further. She had learned from experience that when Rex indicated the presence of drugs, ignoring his alert was never the right choice. She pulled out her radio and contacted her supervisor, Sergeant Martinez. "This is Chen. Rex has alerted to possible narcotics in Judge Holloway's courtroom. I need guidance on how to proceed with investigation." The radio crackled for a moment before Martinez's voice came through clearly. "Are you certain about the alert, Chen? Judge Holloway's courtroom?" "Absolutely certain, Sergeant. Rex is showing strong indication near the judge's bench. There appears to be a loose panel that might conceal something." There was a pause before Martinez responded. "I'm sending Detective Rodriguez to assist. Don't proceed with any physical investigation until he arrives. Secure the area and document everything." Sarah acknowledged the order and began taking photos of Rex's behavior and the area where he was alerting. She made careful notes about the time, Rex's specific actions, and the apparent loose panel. Documentation was crucial in cases like this. Everything had to be recorded properly to ensure any evidence discovered would be admissible in court. While waiting for Detective Rodriguez, Sarah noticed other details about the courtroom that she hadn't paid attention to before. The carpet in front of the judge's bench showed slight wear patterns that suggested people had spent time in this area when the court wasn't in session. There were also some scuff marks on the wooden floor near the base of the bench that didn't match the normal wear patterns from court proceedings. Rex remained focused on the panel, occasionally looking up at Sarah with an expression that seemed to say, "Why aren't we investigating this?" His training had taught him to alert and then wait for his handler to take action, but Sarah could see his frustration at the delay. Dogs didn't understand bureaucracy or the need to follow proper procedures. Detective Rodriguez arrived 15 minutes later, accompanied by Sergeant Martinez. Rodriguez was a veteran investigator with 20 years of experience, including 5 years working with the Narcotics Division. He had worked with canine units before and understood the reliability of a well-trained drug dog's alerts. "What do we have here, Officer Chen?" Rodriguez asked as he surveyed the scene. Sarah walked him through Rex's behavior and showed him the panel that appeared to be loose. Rex immediately became excited again when the new officers arrived. knowing that their presence might mean the investigation would finally proceed. Rex has been consistently alerting to this specific area, Sarah explained. The panel appears to be removable, which isn't consistent with the other panels around the bench. Rodriguez examined the panel carefully, running his fingers along the edges just as Sarah had done. You're right. This definitely looks like it was designed to be opened. He looked at Sergeant Martinez. What's our protocol here? This is Judge Holloway's courtroom. Martinez considered the situation carefully. Judge Holloway was not only respected, but also had significant influence in the local legal community. However, a reliable drug dog alert couldn't be ignored regardless of whose courtroom it was in. We proceed with the investigation, but we do it by the book. Document everything and I'll contact the courthouse administrator to inform them of what we're doing. Rodriguez nodded and put on latex gloves. Officer Chen, have Rex alert one more time to confirm. Sarah commanded Rex to search the area again, and he immediately went to the same panel, sitting and looking up at her with the same confident expression. That's definitely a positive alert, Rodriguez confirmed. We have probable cause to investigate. Rodriguez carefully examined the panel more closely and discovered that it was held in place by 4 small clips rather than permanent fasteners. With gentle pressure, the clips released and the panel swung open like a small door. The space behind it was dark, but Rodriguez's flashlight revealed that it wasn't empty. Inside the hidden compartment, wrapped carefully in plastic bags, were several items that made everyone present stop and stare. There were bundles of cash, what appeared to be packets of white powder, and several manila envelopes that bulged with documents. But most shocking of all was a small digital camera and what looked like recording equipment. Rex's tail wagged triumphantly. He had done his job perfectly, leading them to a discovery that was clearly much larger than anyone had anticipated. Sarah felt a mix of pride in her partner and growing concern about what they had stumbled into. This wasn't just a simple drug case. This was something much more complex and potentially dangerous. Rodriguez carefully photographed everything in the compartment before touching anything. We need to treat this as a major crime scene, he said quietly. This isn't just about drugs anymore. Detective Rodriguez called for additional backup and evidence technicians before carefully beginning to remove items from the hidden compartment. Sarah kept Rex at a safe distance but close enough that he could continue to monitor the area. The drug dog's job was essentially complete, but Sarah sensed that they might need his skills again before this investigation was over. The first item Rodriguez removed was one of the manila envelopes. Through the plastic wrapping, they could see that it contained what appeared to be photographs and documents. The second envelope was thicker and felt like it contained more photographs along with what might be computer disks or USB drives. The packets of white powder were carefully extracted and placed in evidence bags. Even without testing, Rodriguez was confident they contained cocaine based on their appearance and the way they were packaged. But the real mystery was what these drugs were doing hidden in Judge Holloway's courtroom, and why they were stored alongside recording equipment and documents. Sergeant Martinez had stepped outside to make phone calls, and Sarah could hear him speaking in urgent, hushed tones. This discovery was going to reach the highest levels of law enforcement and courthouse administration very quickly. Finding drugs and what appeared to be surveillance equipment hidden in a judge's courtroom was the kind of incident that could shake the entire local justice system. The evidence. Technicians arrived and immediately began processing the scene with meticulous care. They photographed everything from multiple angles, dusted for fingerprints, and carefully cataloged each item as it was removed from the compartment. Sarah watched the process with fascination, knowing that this level of care was necessary to ensure that whatever case eventually resulted from this discovery would hold up in court. One of the technicians, an experienced investigator named Helen Park, examined the recording equipment with particular interest. "This is sophisticated stuff," she commented to Rodriguez. "Not the kind of thing you'd find at an electronics store. This looks like professional surveillance equipment." As more items were removed from the compartment, the picture became increasingly disturbing. There were several cell phones, what appeared to be listening devices, and a small but high-quality digital camera with a telephoto lens. Everything was carefully wrapped and organized, suggesting that whoever had hidden these items had been using this location regularly and systematically. Rex remained alert and interested in the proceedings. though he was no longer actively searching. Sarah could tell that he sensed the importance of what was happening. Dogs were remarkably good at reading human emotions and stress levels, and everyone present was operating with a heightened level of tension and concern. District Attorney Patricia Blackwood arrived at the courthouse within an hour of being notified about the discovery. She was a tough prosecutor with a reputation for taking on difficult cases, including several high-profile corruption investigations. Her presence indicated that this situation was being treated with the utmost seriousness. "What exactly do we have here?" Blackwood asked Rodriguez as she surveyed the evidence that had been laid out on tables in a secure conference room. Rodriguez walked her through everything they had found. Drug dog alerted to narcotics, which led us to discover this hidden compartment. Along with what appears to be cocaine, we found surveillance equipment, recording devices, and these sealed envelopes containing photographs and documents that we haven't opened yet. Blackwood examined the evidence carefully, her expression growing more serious with each item she reviewed. "Have we determined how long this compartment has existed? Was it part of the original construction or added later?" Helen Park had been examining the construction of the hidden space. "Based on the construction methods and materials, I'd say this was added sometime after the original courthouse was built. The clips holding the panel are modern, and the interior of the compartment shows signs of regular use." Sarah spoke up for the first time since the investigation had expanded. "Judge Holloway has been using this courtroom for her entire tenure on the bench. If someone has been accessing this compartment regularly, they would need to have access to the courtroom when it's not in session." Blackwood nodded thoughtfully. "That's a very limited group of people. Judges, court staff, cleaning crew, and security personnel." She paused and looked directly at Sarah. "Officer Chen, I want you to think carefully. In all your security sweeps of this courthouse, has Rex ever alerted to this area before?" Sarah considered the question seriously. "We rotate our sweep patterns, but we've been through this courtroom dozens of times over the past year. Rex has never shown interest in this area before today. That suggests that whatever triggered his alert was placed there recently," Rodriguez observed. "The drugs at minimum haven't been there long." Blackwood made a decision. "We need to open these envelopes and examine their contents, but we do it here now with full documentation. If this involves judicial corruption, we can't afford to let word of this investigation leak out." The first envelope contained photographs that made everyone in the room fall silent. They showed what appeared to be meetings between Judge Holloway and several individuals who were known to law enforcement as being connected to organized crime. The photographs were taken from various angles and locations, suggesting sustained surveillance over a period of time. The second envelope contained bank records, copies of financial transactions, and what appeared to be coded communications. The documents suggested a pattern of payments being made to accounts associated with Judge Holloway in exchange for favorable rulings in specific cases. But the most shocking discovery came from the digital storage devices. They contained recorded conversations between Judge Holloway and attorneys representing known criminals, discussions about fixing cases, and detailed records of bribes paid and received over a period of several years. Sarah felt her stomach drop as the full scope of what they had discovered became clear. This wasn't just about drugs or simple corruption. This was evidence of a systematic effort to undermine the justice system itself. Rex had led them to uncover what appeared to be a massive judicial corruption scheme that had been operating for years. Blackwood's expression was grim as she reviewed the evidence. "This changes everything. We're not just looking at drug possession or even simple bribery. This appears to be a conspiracy that could have affected dozens of cases and potentially allowed dangerous criminals to escape justice." The room fell, silent as everyone absorbed the magnitude of what had been discovered. Sarah looked down at Rex, who was lying quietly beside her chair, completely unaware that his keen nose had just uncovered one of the biggest corruption scandals in the county's history. "What happens next?" Sarah asked quietly. Blackwood stood up, her jaw set with determination. "Next, we build a case that will ensure justice is finally served. But first, we need to figure out who else might be involved in this conspiracy, and we need to do it without alerting anyone that we've made this discovery." The investigation moved to a secure facility outside the courthouse within hours of the discovery. District Attorney Blackwood knew that conducting the investigation within the same building where Judge Holloway worked would be too risky. If she or her co-conspirators learned about the discovery, Evidence could disappear and witnesses might be intimidated or worse. Sarah and Rex were asked to remain available for the investigation, as Rex's discovery had been the key that unlocked the entire case. Sarah found herself in the unusual position of being both a witness and an active participant in what was becoming one of the most significant corruption investigations in the state's history. Federal agents arrived that evening, indicating that the case had attracted attention at the highest levels. The FBI's Public Corruption Unit specialized in cases involving judicial and government corruption, and they brought resources and expertise that would be crucial for building a case that could withstand scrutiny in federal court. Agent Maria Santos took the lead on the federal investigation. She was a veteran investigator who had worked on several high-profile corruption cases, including the prosecution of 2 federal judges and a mayor who had been taking bribes from organized crime. Her reputation for thorough, methodical investigations made her the perfect choice to lead this complex case. Officer Chen, Agent Santos said during their first meeting, "I need you to walk me through exactly how Rex behaves when he detects different types of narcotics. The defense is going to challenge every aspect of this discovery, so we need to be absolutely certain about the reliability of the initial alert." Sarah spent several hours explaining Rex's training, his track record, and the specific behaviors he displayed in Judge Holloway's courtroom. She provided documentation of his certifications, records of his previous successful alerts, and testimony from other officers who had worked with them. Meanwhile, other agents were diving deep into the evidence that had been discovered in the hidden compartment. The recorded conversations were particularly damaging, as they provided direct evidence of Judge Holloway discussing specific cases and the amount she expected to receive for favorable rulings. One conversation was especially shocking. In it, Judge Holloway could be heard discussing a murder case involving Vincent "Vinny" Marcello, a known associate of organized crime. She promised to suppress key evidence in exchange for a payment of $50,000, essentially guaranteeing that a violent criminal would go free. The financial records told a story of systematic corruption spanning more than 5 years. Regular deposits to offshore accounts, purchases of luxury items that far exceeded Judge Holloway's judicial salary, and a pattern of payments that corresponded directly to major cases heard in her courtroom. Agent Santos assembled a team to cross-reference every case that Judge Holloway had presided over during the time period covered by the evidence. They discovered that dozens of cases involving serious crimes had resulted in surprisingly lenient sentences or dismissals based on questionable legal rulings. The surveillance photographs revealed the extent of Judge Holloway's criminal network. She had been meeting regularly with known organized crime figures, corrupt attorneys, and even other court officials who appeared to be part of the conspiracy. The photographs showed meetings in restaurants, parking garages, and private homes, all locations where they thought they couldn't be observed. Sarah learned that the investigation had actually begun months earlier, based on tips from honest attorneys who had noticed patterns in Judge Holloway's rulings. However, investigators had been unable to gather concrete evidence until Rex's discovery provided the breakthrough they needed. "Your dog may have saved lives," Agent Santos told Sarah during one of their meetings. Some of the criminals who received favorable treatment from Judge Holloway went on to commit additional violent crimes. If we can prove the corruption and overturn those rulings, we might be able to bring justice for victims who thought they would never see it. The investigation team worked around the clock to build their case while maintaining absolute secrecy. They couldn't afford to let Judge Holloway or her associates know that their scheme had been discovered. Court proceedings continued normally, with Judge Holloway presiding over cases as if nothing had happened. Sarah found this aspect of the investigation particularly difficult. She and Rex continued their routine security sweeps of the courthouse, including Judge Holloway's courtroom. Knowing what they now knew about the corruption that had taken place there, Sarah had to act completely normal while walking past the judge in courthouse hallways, greeting her politely as if nothing had changed. Rex seemed to sense that something important was happening. Dogs were remarkably attuned to their handlers' stress levels, and Sarah was operating under tremendous pressure to maintain the secrecy of the investigation while continuing her normal duties. The federal agents discovered that the corruption extended beyond just Judge Holloway. Court clerks had been falsifying records, bailiffs had been providing information about jury selections, and even some attorneys had been actively participating in the scheme by paying bribes for favorable treatment of their clients. As the investigation progressed, agents began making strategic arrests of lower-level participants in the conspiracy. They started with people who were likely to cooperate in exchange for reduced sentences, slowly building a case that would eventually reach Judge Holloway herself. Each arrest was carefully planned to avoid alerting the main targets. The subjects were taken into custody quietly, away from the courthouse, and were immediately offered the opportunity to cooperate in exchange for leniency. Most chose to provide information rather than face the full weight of federal corruption charges. Sarah watched this process unfold with a mixture of fascination and concern. She had always believed in the justice system, and discovering the extent of the corruption had shaken her faith. However, seeing the dedicated work of honest investigators and prosecutors working to restore integrity to the system gave her hope. The evidence continued to mount against Judge Holloway and her associates. Phone records showed frequent communications between all the major players in the conspiracy. Financial investigators tracked money flowing from organized crime figures through intermediaries to accounts controlled by the judge and other corrupt officials. Agent Santos kept Sarah informed about the progress of the investigation, recognizing that she and Rex had been instrumental in making it possible. "We're getting close to making the major arrests," she told Sarah during one of their meetings. "Judge Holloway has no idea that we know about her activities, which means she's continuing to create new evidence against herself every day." The final phase of the investigation was approaching, and Sarah knew that soon the careful, secret work they had been doing would become very public. Judge Holloway would learn that her years of corruption had been exposed, and the carefully constructed criminal network she had built would come crashing down around her. 3 weeks after Rex's discovery, Agent Santos called Sarah to a special briefing that would determine the final phase of the investigation. The conference room was filled with federal agents, state prosecutors, and local law enforcement officials who had been working tirelessly to build an airtight case against Judge Holloway and her criminal network. "Tomorrow morning, we execute coordinated arrests of all major participants in this corruption conspiracy," Agent Santos announced to the assembled team. "We have warrants for Judge Holloway, 3 court clerks, 2 bailiffs, 5 attorneys, and 12 individuals connected to organized crime who were paying bribes for favorable treatment." Sarah felt her pulse quicken as she realized the magnitude of what was about to happen. In less than 24 hours, the courthouse where she worked every day would be turned upside down as federal agents arrested some of the most powerful people in the local justice system. The plan was complex and required perfect timing. Judge Holloway would be arrested in her chambers before court opened for the day. The other court officials would be taken into custody simultaneously to prevent them from destroying evidence or warning each other. The attorneys and organized crime figures would be arrested at their homes and offices at exactly the same time. "Officer Chen," Agent Santos addressed Sarah directly, "we need you and Rex to conduct a routine security sweep of the courthouse tomorrow morning, just as you always do." "We can't change any normal patterns that might alert Judge Holloway that something unusual is happening," Sarah nodded, understanding the critical role she and Rex would play in maintaining the illusion of normalcy until the moment the arrests began. They would be conducting what appeared to be a routine sweep, while federal agents were positioning themselves throughout the building. District Attorney Blackwood stood up to address the team. "I want everyone to understand what we've accomplished here. This investigation has uncovered systematic corruption that affected more than 100 cases over 5 years. Violent criminals walked free, innocent people may have been wrongly convicted, and the public's trust in our justice system was betrayed by the very people sworn to uphold it. The evidence they had compiled was overwhelming. In addition to the materials Rex had led them to discover, investigators had recorded dozens of conversations, traced financial transactions, and documented a pattern of corruption that reached into every aspect of Judge Holloway's courtroom operations. Sarah learned that some of the cases affected by the corruption involved crimes that had personally touched her life. A drunk driver who had killed a family of 4 had received a suspended sentence after Judge Holloway ruled that evidence had been improperly collected. A drug dealer who had been selling narcotics Near schools had avoided prison time when the judge dismissed charges on a technicality that legal experts said was questionable at best. Rex didn't just find drugs and documents. Agent Santos told Sarah privately after the briefing. He uncovered a system that was allowing dangerous people to escape justice while innocent victims and their families were denied the protection they deserved. That evening, Sarah went home to her small apartment and spent extra time with Rex, knowing that the next day would change both their lives forever. Rex had no understanding of the historical significance of his discovery, but Sarah could see that he sensed her nervousness and stayed close to her side throughout the night. Sarah barely slept, thinking about what would happen when Judge Holloway realized that her carefully constructed criminal enterprise had been exposed. The judge was known for her intelligence and composure, but learning that years of corruption had been uncovered would test even her ability to maintain control. The next morning arrived gray and overcast, matching Sarah's mood as she prepared for what would be the most important day of her law enforcement career. She and Rex arrived at the courthouse at their usual time, but Sarah was acutely aware that federal agents were already positioned throughout the building, waiting for the coordinated arrests to begin. As they began their security sweep, Sarah tried to act completely normal despite the knowledge that Judge Holloway's arrest was scheduled to occur in less than an hour. Rex, sensing his handler's tension, stayed closer to her than usual, but performed his duties with his typical professionalism. They were in the lobby when Sarah's radio crackled with a coded message that meant the arrests were beginning. Her heart pounded as she realized that at that very moment, federal agents were entering Judge Holloway's chambers with an arrest warrant for judicial corruption, bribery, and conspiracy. Sarah and Rex continued their sweep as planned, but Sarah could hear unusual activity throughout the building. There were more footsteps than normal, hushed conversations, and the kind of controlled urgency that indicated something significant was happening. Judge Holloway's bailiff, Thomas Morrison, was one of the first to be arrested. Sarah watched from a distance as federal agents approached him in the hallway outside the courtrooms. Morrison had been with Judge Holloway for 8 years and had been instrumental in facilitating the corruption by providing information about jury selections and helping to coordinate the timing of bribe payments. Morrison's face went white when he saw the federal badges and realized what was happening. Unlike the controlled, dignified manner he usually displayed in court, he began protesting loudly and demanding to know what he was being charged with. His arrest created enough commotion that other courthouse employees began to gather. Wondering what was happening, within minutes, word began spreading throughout the courthouse that federal agents were making arrests. Sarah heard fragments of conversations as people tried to understand what was occurring and whether they might be targets themselves. Court clerk Jennifer Walsh was arrested next, taken into custody as she arrived for work and discovered federal agents waiting in her office. Walsh had been responsible for falsifying records and ensuring that certain cases were assigned to Judge Holloway, rather than other judges who might not be willing to accept bribes. The coordinated nature of the arrest meant that none of the participants in the conspiracy had time to warn the others or attempt to destroy evidence. By the time Judge Holloway realized that federal agents were in her chambers with an arrest warrant, her entire criminal network was already being dismantled. Sarah found herself in the unique position of witnessing history as it unfolded. The courthouse that had been the scene of corruption for years was finally being cleansed by the discovery that she and Rex had made possible. Justice was being served in the very building where it had been denied for so long. As the morning progressed, the full scope of the arrests became clear. Attorneys were being led away in handcuffs, court officials were being read their rights, and the organized crime figures who had been paying bribes were being taken into custody at locations throughout the city. Rex remained calm throughout the chaos, focused on his duties but clearly aware that something extraordinary was happening. Sarah was proud of her partner's professionalism and grateful for the instincts that had led them to make the discovery that started it all. Judge Margaret Holloway's arrest was unlike anything the courthouse had ever witnessed. Sarah and Rex were positioned near the main entrance when federal agents emerged from the judicial chambers, escorting the judge in handcuffs. The woman who had presided over hundreds of cases with authority and dignity was now facing the same justice system she had corrupted for years. Judge Holloway maintained her composure even as she was led through the courthouse corridors, but Sarah could see the shock and fear in her eyes. For the first time, the judge was not in control of the courtroom. She was just another defendant facing serious federal charges. The media had been alerted to the arrests, and reporters were gathering outside the courthouse as news of the corruption scandal broke. Camera crews from local and national news stations positioned themselves to capture images of one of the most respected judges in the state being led away in handcuffs. Sarah watched the scene unfold with mixed emotions. She felt satisfaction that justice was finally being served, but also sadness that the corruption had been allowed to continue for so long. How many victims had been denied justice because of Judge Holloway's criminal activities? How many dangerous criminals had been allowed to walk free because they had paid the right bribes? Agent Santos approached Sarah as the initial arrests were being completed. "Officer Chen, we need you and Rex present when we execute the search warrant for Judge Holloway's chambers. Your testimony about Rex's original alert will be crucial for establishing how this evidence was discovered." Sarah and Rex accompanied the federal agents back to Judge Holloway's courtroom, which was now being treated as a crime scene. Evidence technicians were carefully documenting everything, and agents were conducting a thorough search for any additional evidence that might have been missed. During the initial investigation, the irony of the situation was not lost on Sarah. The same courtroom where Judge Holloway had perverted justice for years was now the scene of a federal investigation that would ensure she faced the full consequences of her crimes. The elevated judge's bench that had been a symbol of her authority was now being dismantled as agents searched for additional hidden compartments. Rex was brought back to the area where he had originally alerted, and Agent Santos asked Sarah to have him search the area again for documentation purposes. Rex immediately went to the spot where the hidden compartment had been discovered, confirming once again the reliability of his original alert. This dog's nose started the investigation that brought down one of the most extensive judicial corruption schemes we've ever seen. Agent Santos told the assembled media later that day, "Officer Chen and Rex proved that sometimes justice comes from the most unexpected sources." The initial court appearance for Judge Holloway and her co-conspirators was scheduled for the following week in federal court. The case would be heard by Judge Robert Crawford, a federal judge from another district who had been specially assigned to avoid any conflicts of interest with the local courthouse. Sarah was called to testify about Rex's discovery during the preliminary hearing. She found herself in the unusual position of testifying against someone who had been a colleague, albeit one she had discovered was corrupt. The federal courtroom was packed with reporters, attorneys, and citizens who wanted to witness this historic moment. "Officer Chen," the federal prosecutor asked, "please describe Rex's behavior on the morning of the discovery." Sarah walked the court through every detail of that morning, from Rex's initial alert to the systematic way he had led them to the hidden compartment. She explained his training, his track record, and the specific behaviors that indicated he had detected narcotics in Judge Holloway's courtroom. Judge Holloway's defense attorney tried to challenge the reliability of Rex's alert, suggesting that the dog might have been responding to old residue or might have been giving a false positive. However, Sarah's detailed testimony about Rex's training and the subsequent discovery of substantial evidence made it clear that the alert had been completely accurate. "Has Rex ever given you a false positive alert in his 3 years of service?" the prosecutor asked. "No, never," Sarah replied firmly. "Rex has an impeccable record. When he alerts, there are always drugs present." The most dramatic moment of the hearing came when the prosecutor presented the evidence that had been discovered in the hidden compartment. Judge Holloway's face went pale as recordings of her own voice were played in court, clearly documenting her involvement in accepting bribes and fixing cases. One particularly damaging recording involved a conversation about the Vincent Marcello murder case. Judge Holloway could be heard discussing specific evidence she would suppress and the exact amount of money she expected to receive for ensuring that Marcello walked free. "Your Honor," the prosecutor addressed Judge Crawford, "this recording demonstrates that the defendant was willing to allow a violent criminal to escape justice in exchange for personal financial gain. The impact on public safety and the integrity of our justice system cannot be overstated." Judge Holloway's attorney argued for bail, claiming that his client had strong ties to the community and was not a flight risk. However, the federal prosecutor pointed out that Judge Holloway had access to significant financial resources, including offshore accounts funded by years of corruption and had demonstrated a willingness to undermine the justice system for personal gain. Judge Crawford denied bail, stating that the evidence presented suggested a pattern of corruption so extensive that releasing Judge Holloway would pose a risk to the integrity of ongoing legal proceedings and potentially endanger witnesses who might testify against her. As Judge Holloway was led away to await trial, Sarah felt a sense of closure about the discovery that had started it all. Rex had done his job perfectly, alerting to the presence of drugs that led to uncovering a much larger criminal conspiracy. The justice system that had been corrupted by Judge Holloway's criminal activities was now working as it should to hold her accountable. The hearing also revealed the full scope of the corruption network. Prosecutors outlined how Judge Holloway had worked with court clerks to ensure certain cases were assigned to her courtroom, how bailiffs had provided inside information about jury selections, and how attorneys had served as intermediaries between organized crime figures and the corrupt judge. The financial evidence was particularly compelling. Prosecutors showed that Judge Holloway had received more than $2 million in bribes over the 5-year period covered by the investigation. She had used this money to purchase luxury cars, expensive jewelry, and a vacation home that would have been impossible to afford on a judge's salary. Sarah left the courthouse that day knowing that justice was finally being served. The corruption that had been hidden beneath the surface of the local justice system had been exposed and was being prosecuted to the full extent of the law. Rex had played a crucial role in making it all possible, proving once again that sometimes the most important discoveries come from the most unexpected sources. The local news that evening led with the story of how a police dog's alert had uncovered massive judicial corruption. Sarah watched the coverage at home with Rex beside her, feeling proud of her partner's role in restoring integrity to the justice system they had sworn to serve. 6 months after Rex's discovery that changed everything, the federal corruption trial of Judge Margaret Holloway and her co-conspirators concluded with verdicts that sent shockwaves through the legal community. Judge Holloway was convicted on all counts: bribery, conspiracy, money laundering, and obstruction of justice. She was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison, a punishment that ensured she would never again have the opportunity to corrupt the justice system. Sarah testified during the trial, once again walking the jury through Rex's discovery and the chain of events that led to uncovering the massive corruption scheme. Her testimony was considered crucial by prosecutors, as it established the legitimate basis for the investigation that followed. Officer Chen and her K-9 partner Rex represent the very best of law enforcement, Federal Prosecutor James Mitchell said during his closing arguments. Their dedication to duty and their willingness to follow the evidence wherever it led helped restore integrity to a justice system that had been corrupted by greed and criminal conspiracy. The trial revealed even more shocking details about the extent of the corruption. Over the 5 years covered by the charges, Judge Holloway had taken bribes in more than 60 cases, allowing violent criminals to escape serious punishment while innocent. People were sometimes wrongly convicted when they couldn't afford to pay for favorable treatment. The Vincent Marcello case became a symbol of how the corruption had endangered public safety. Marcello had been allowed to walk free on murder charges after Judge Holloway suppressed key evidence in exchange for a $50,000 bribe. 3 months later, Marcello had killed again, a young mother walking home from work. The victim's family filed a federal lawsuit against Judge Holloway and the court system, seeking damages for the preventable tragedy. Sarah attended the sentencing hearing, wanting to see the conclusion of the case that had begun with Rex's alert in the courthouse. Judge Crawford's words during sentencing reflected the gravity of Judge Holloway's crimes. The defendant violated the most sacred trust of our justice system, Judge Crawford said as he imposed the sentence. Citizens must be able to trust that when they enter a courtroom, they will receive fair and impartial treatment under the law. Judge Holloway destroyed that trust and endangered public safety for personal financial gain. The other co-conspirators received sentences ranging from 3 to 15 years, depending on their level of involvement in the conspiracy. Court clerk Jennifer Walsh, who had falsified records and helped coordinate bribe payments, received 8 years. Bailiff Thomas Morrison, who had provided inside information about jury selections, was sentenced to 5 years. The attorneys who had participated in the bribery scheme faced both criminal penalties and professional consequences. 3 lawyers received prison sentences and were permanently disbarred, ending their legal careers. The organized crime figures who had paid the bribes were convicted under federal racketeering statutes and received lengthy sentences that effectively dismantled their criminal operations. The corruption scandal led to sweeping reforms in the local courthouse system. New security protocols were implemented, including more frequent and thorough canine sweeps of all areas. Financial disclosure requirements for judges were strengthened, and a new oversight committee was established to monitor judicial conduct. Sarah and Rex were recognized as heroes by law enforcement agencies throughout the state. They received commendations from the governor, the state attorney general, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Rex was awarded the Law Enforcement Dog of the Year award by the National Police Dog Association, recognizing his role in uncovering one of the most significant corruption cases in recent history. The local media followed up on the story throughout the trial and aftermath, chronicling how one dog's keen sense of smell had led to the restoration of integrity in the local justice system. Sarah was featured in several magazine articles and television interviews, always making sure to emphasize Rex's crucial role in the discovery. Rex was just doing his job, Sarah said during one interview. He's trained to detect drugs, and that's exactly what he did. None of us could have predicted that his alert would lead to uncovering such extensive corruption. But that's the beauty of working with a well-trained police dog. They follow the evidence wherever it leads. The courthouse returned to normal operations with new judges and court staff, but the memory of the corruption scandal served as a constant reminder of the importance of integrity in the justice system. Cases that had been affected by Judge Holloway's corrupt rulings were reviewed, and several convictions were overturned while previously dismissed charges against dangerous criminals were refiled. The Marcello family, whose daughter had been killed by the criminal Judge Holloway had allowed to escape justice, established a foundation dedicated to supporting victims of judicial corruption. They credited Sarah and Rex with preventing other families from experiencing similar tragedies by exposing the corruption before it could claim more victims. Sarah continued her work as a K-9 officer, but the high-profile nature of the corruption case had changed her career trajectory. She was promoted to a supervisory position within the K-9 unit and became responsible for training new handlers and their dogs. Her experience with the courthouse investigation made her an expert on the use of K-9 units in complex criminal investigations. Rex, now a celebrity in law enforcement circles, continued his work with the same dedication and professionalism he had always shown. He seemed completely unaware of his fame, focused only on doing the job he loved with the partner he trusted. The bond between Sarah and Rex had been strengthened by their shared experience of uncovering the corruption and seeing justice served. The hidden compartment in Judge Holloway's former courtroom was permanently sealed, but a small plaque was installed nearby recognizing the role that K-9 Rex had played in discovering the corruption. Visitors to the courthouse often asked to see the spot where the investigation began, and court personnel took pride in telling the story of how one dog's alert had helped restore integrity to their justice system. 5 years after the discovery, Sarah reflected on how that routine morning security sweep had changed so many lives. Judge Holloway remained in federal prison. Her criminal network had been dismantled, and dozens of cases had been reviewed to ensure that justice was properly served. Most importantly, the public's trust in the local justice system had been restored through the hard work of honest investigators and prosecutors who were committed to upholding the law. Sarah looked down at Rex, now 8 years old but still alert and dedicated to his duties. "Good boy, Rex," she said, scratching behind his ears. "You saved the justice system with that nose of yours." Rex wagged his tail and looked up at his partner with the same trusting expression he had always worn. For him, it had been just another day at work, following his training and doing his job. But for everyone else involved, it had been the day that justice finally triumphed over corruption, thanks to the keen instincts of one very special police dog.